Good evening and welcome to this Friday edition of the Hot Seat. Joining me in studio today is the hottest panel in the land. I have from my left Jimmy Achalam. I also have from the Government Media Center, and until today I got here Deputy OO. Acting OO. The voice you're listening to there is of Obed Katurebe, who is the acting head of the Uganda Media Center, but also a veteran of this show. In that same line, I have in not acting capacity, but himself, Dismas Nkunda, a veteran journalist and analyst. I also have sometimes host of this show, Raymond Mujuni. Raymond, good to see you.
Thank you so much for having us, sir.
And to your dear listener, I should inform you that your copy of the Saturday Monitor is already on the streets, and the headline in tomorrow's paper is about the new speed limits that are about to come into force. Apparently, speed limits for the Kajansi, I don't know why they call it expressway, but here it's called the Kajansi Expressway 2, and the Kigo Southern Bypass will be 100 kilometers per hour. That's the new speed limit. While for roads like Wampeo, this is on Gayaza Road, Majije, Nakwero, Gayaza, Kalaji, Kawempe and Bombo Road, and many other areas of Gayaza and Kawempe, the new speed limit is set to be 50 kilometers per hour. No details yet on what happens to the express penalty scheme, so buy your copy of the Saturday Monitor to get to know more about what this means for you who is driving on our roads. The two major stories this week, it's political season in Uganda. Political parties are aligning themselves ahead of the elections in January 2026, and later on the show we'll be spreading our legs into the region to discuss the peace agreement that was signed in Washington, D.C. between the foreign ministers of Rwanda and the DRC. But to set us rolling, gentlemen, an interesting coalition that is in the works between the People's Front for Transition, otherwise known as PFF, which is a breakaway faction of the FDC,
People's Front for Freedom,
and the People's Front for Freedom, and the Alliance for National Transformation, which is also a breakaway faction of the FDC, headed by retired General Mugisha Muntu. They're apparently in talks to form a joint political transition that will likely see them front a joint candidate in the upcoming elections. I also remember seeing General Mugisha Muntu on one of the radio TV stations yesterday saying that he doesn't rule out coalition talks with the NUP. Let me begin with you, Dismas. Are we likely to see a joint candidacy of Mugisha Muntu and Kizza Besigye again?
I also watched it on news yesterday, and I was perplexed as to how that would happen. One being a general,
speaking to the mic.
one being a retired general, another one being a retired colonel, and how that would pan out. But I do think that as members of the opposition, certainly if they put their arms together, it's much more than if each of them took their own path in order to seize power from the ruling party, the NRM. So
the question would be, what brings them together this time around? Because when this divorce between FDC and ANT happened in the aftermath of the 2016 election, it was a divergence of views on how to approach what they consider the fight against dictatorship. General Mugisha Muntu seemed to prefer a grassroots bottom-up movement, while Kizza Besigye did not rule out the possibility of going on the streets and causing the fall of government. So my question then becomes, has the PFF come to the realization that ANT's approach is the winning formula and therefore they should work together? Or is it the other way around, that ANT has come to the realization that PFF's approach is the right one?
I think both of them have come to realization that actually each one, if they take their own route, they may not be able to gain anything. So they can borrow from either what the ANT is saying, what the PFF is saying, or is planning to do, and then they be able to think of how they can harmonize, be able to have one voice or one candidates that can be able to carry on what they are, they think is the best way to wrestle power from the NRM.
Raymond, when you're still in the newsroom, you covered a lot of these internal fights within then the bigger FDC party, the differences between the personalities of General Mugisha Muntu and Kano Dr. Kizza Besigye. Do you think those differences will not affect this same coalition now, 10 years later?
I think it's highly unlikely that a political coalition will ever emerge, particularly amongst Ugandan opposition, because one, political parties are just vehicles of expression for candidates. The biggest contestation in the last election about a political coalition between National Unity Platform, ANT, FDC and the others was who becomes a Member of Parliament representative. Is it the National Unity Platform? People have spent close to 250 million shillings to get the card. Are they going to forfeit it?
Wait, spent it in campaigning or?
Both campaigning and bribing members of the Select and Election Committee.
These include no
Yes,
MPs?
of course these include no MPs.
Interesting.
So how do you sideline them? And I know that there were very strong talks in the last election between Bobi Wine, Besigye, Muntu. There were also questions about how do you fundraise? If we're fundraising, who do we fundraise from? Everyone has their own tradition of fundraisers. Besigye has people that he has traditionally fundraised from. Bobi Wine had new sources of fundraising. We included the diaspora. When you fundraise that kind of money, where does it go? And this is where the contestations would come, because a party like Alliance for National Transformation would say that money needs to go to the lower rank of the political party. But I don't think that National Unity Platform or even FDC, which is now PFF, would allow that, because for them the politics is more, let us excite the masses, then you don't need to go and do the groundwork. So it's highly unlikely that you will have a coalition, but also there are fractures between. I know that Muntu and Lukwago are the ones that are talking, but there are fractures that run deep. Many of the people who are very strong campaigners of Muntu detest completely members of PFF.
Because they represent the radical wing of the FDC that had kicked out.
Not just the radical wing, they have their own issues that come in there. And I think the only masterstroke that made this meeting happen must have been Semuju Uganda, because Semuju was the campaigner for Mugisha Muntu, and now he's one of the key mobilizers for PFF. But short of that, many of the people who are traditional supporters of Kano Dr. Kizza Besigye, like Ingrid Trinawe, are not acceptable to Muntu loyalists. I don't see, for example, Ali Salaso working with Ingrid Trinawe anytime, any soon. So it's highly unlikely that we'll have a coalition.
Obed, I want to come to you. I spoke to one of the PFF foot soldiers a couple of days ago. And from that conversation, it seems to me that these coalition talks are really a way of bringing back Kano Dr. Kizza Besigye back into the political foray, because the PFF internally is discussing an option of nominating Kano Dr. Kizza Besigye in jail, just like they did in 2005, and then putting his imprisonment as an issue on the ballot, and putting the NRM in such a tight spot that on top of having to deal with Bobi Wine, President Yoweri Museveni, while campaigning in Western Uganda and other parts of the country where Kizza Besigye enjoys support, he will have to explain why Kizza Besigye remains in prison. Do you think that's the case? That this is really an attempt to revive Kano Dr. Kizza Besigye?
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't want to speculate much about what they're trying to brought in respect of what you've just told us. But one, what I know for sure that Besigye, until probably when he was taken into prison, he had several times said he'll never run again for presidency.
But according to some people in PFF, former FDC, they say that in the last couple of months or weeks he has been approached, and as of the last meeting he had been positive on the decision to run.
Maybe they're right, but like most of my colleagues have said, this marriage is not tenable. It's not, because PFF is the cluster group that threw out Mugisha Muntu. One detested, they didn't agree with Mugisha Muntu's method of work, and created the Katonga office that was running parallel to his that was in the Janakumbi. They are again the people who didn't. In fact, it was not about even his.
But that might be debatable because you also have Nandala Mafabi, who replaced him as Secretary General, and Paul still at the helm of the FDC.
No. Why I was not agreeing with you is that the point of the fracture, what caused Besigye and Muntu to fall apart, was the method of work. No. The real reason why they fell out with Muntu, they alleged that he was Museveni's mole. And that's what people like Wafuru Gutu, who up to now have not, the two people have not appended their signatures, and that's why the final document was not signed. The signatures on the memorandum of understanding
between ANT and FDC.
Absolutely. And
PFF.
Wafra and basically are extremists who think Muntu and whoever associates with him at the night works with President Museveni, which I don't think is true. So I'm seeing some two former co-wives who were on each other's neck, but when the husband marries the third one, then they go they coexist together because now they have no option. They have all been thrown out. So Nandara and
marrying a second
Power threw them. The two co-wives threw them out, and now they're trying to. But the agreement and what? But even then, even if they are to agree. What substantial
value
would they bring on board?
Because to make Besigye's imprisonment an issue on the ballot.
Well, but even PPF can do it without being in alliance with Auntie.
Yes, they can still nominate their man and maybe try to get the value they hope to get. There's a splinter group. I mean, there is still Nandara group and Power in Najanankumbi. They're also nominating.
There's the Democratic Front.
Then there is the Loop.
There's also the Democratic Party.
There's also the Democratic
and there's also the Bad DP, which is
there's also Ecological Party.
I mean, these are the shenanigans we are used to, especially towards an election period. Talk big, ground-standing statements, but they've never convinced anybody of us that are up for a very serious unity that can pose some challenge.
In a minute or less, because we have to go for a commercial break, do you think in the current circumstances it's feasible to talk about a three-horse race, in this case between NRM, President Yoweri Museveni, NUP, Honorable Robert Chagulanyi, and whatever coalition is formed between ANT and PFF?
Yes.
Do you think they can form a viable third force?
Why not? Not even a third force.
Question would be, in the past that has not happened. When Amama Mbabazi was on the ballot, it was really between Kizza Besigye and President Yoweri Museveni. Even in the last election,
it has changed. Now Besigye is in prison, so they have to find a way to work out, the demands you've mentioned. And so it's about interests first. They may have disagreements, but they can decide to put that aside and say, this is what we are focusing on now.
But do you, apart from the grandstanding and the statements, do you really think that elements within PFF or Ugandan opposition would do better with Besigye out of jail and in politics, or they actually do better, much better, when he's kept away?
No,
because in his absence, we've seen new voices emerge within FDC, PFF.
Much better when he participates as a member, not kept away in prison. Of course, if he was out, it would be more vibrant. The momentum would be very different. But now they have to, not give up, but find a way to keep pushing. But is a thinker would maybe have a very different approach. But when you're locked up, what do? Suggestions are brought, and you have to work within those means.
I see. Yeah. We'll take a short commercial break, and when we come back, more of this discussion. AFM. Welcome back from the break. You're listening to 933 KFM. This is the Friday panel of journalists. Standing in for Andrew Mwenda is me, Kwezi Tabaro, and joining me in studio is Raymond Mujuni from, who used to be with the Nation Media Group. I have Dismas Nkunda, I also have Obed Katurebe and Jimmy Achelam. We're discussing the major stories of the week. Major story of the week being the ongoing coalition talks between two opposition parties in Uganda, the ANT, Alliance for National Transformation, and PFF, Patriotic Front. People's Front for Freedom, yes. Both of which are breakaway factions of the Forum for Democratic Change. But gentlemen, before we go back into the discussion, I've read an interesting profile here, which is in tomorrow's paper, of a Ugandan-born Democrat nominee for mayor of New York, Zohran Mamdani, who has quite a lot of people around the world talking. So there's an interesting profile by Andrew Kagwa in the paper tomorrow. Straight out of Nyege Nyege to the mayoral race in New York, Zohran Mamdani, son of famous Ugandan academician Professor Mamdani, is causing quite the ruckus in the United States. Gentlemen, I want us to shift from ANT and PFF to arguably the biggest opposition party, NUP. While other parties have decided to have open contests for their flag bearer positions, NUP has taken an interesting stance on that process. They have an internal committee, and this has raised quite a lot of concerns, lots of grievances. I've seen a statement, I think, that came out of a presser yesterday. This is from the NUP platform Twitter page, saying that today at our premises in Makere Kavule, we have held a presser where we clarified on some of the concerns that had been raised by the public regarding the internal electoral process, and indeed a special committee has been constituted to investigate and handle any arising concerns. We also clarified on the ongoing harmonization process between candidates, and we have made it clear that this exercise is voluntary and out of consent, and those opposed to it are at liberty to remain in their respective elective races. Raymond Mujuni, what exactly is happening in NUP? I've seen quite a lot of
you asked me like I'm the Secretary General of the party.
They used to be your friends.
They still are my friends. Quite unfortunately, political contestations will always exist, and power is power. The National Unity platform will determine some races, particularly within the city centers, in urban areas.
Why would Uganda? Why wouldn't they subject their candidates to open primaries?
Every party has its own dynamics. For example,
it seems NUP is the only one that has this.
No. Sodo and Shatsi Musherure had an arrangement in which they agreed with each other. I will run in one.
But this was a one-off. This was a one-off. But in NUP, this seems to be the way things are done.
No. You're about to see it also in the NRM-SEC election, which is going to come up. The president, the chairman of the party, will definitely step in. Every party has its own internal dynamics and contestations.
I don't know if it's a good look for NUP to be benchmarking on NRM's practices.
Yes, but so the thing with the NUP is that the brother to Robert Chagulanyi, who is Chairman Nyanzi, is a powerful apparatchik of the party. Whether the party likes it or not, whether the party admits to it or not, the man is a powerful member of the party. Powerful in the sense that a lot of the mobilization teams of the party are sent by him. He occupies, I think, the chief of mobilization in the party, and therefore
he's competing with whom?
He's competing in Kawempe South with Roy Semboga. Roy Semboga is one of the founder members of the National platform.
But she has not.
Let's have one person.
Yes,
speaking. Raymond, I wanted you.
So those contestations are in every political party, and those contestations, every political party decides how they deal with them. But like I told you, power is power.
So explain to me.
Yeah.
I am a registered NUP member in Kampala.
Yeah.
I have been serving in the KCCA council or any of the councils, Nakawa. I have my supporters. I think I have a good chance of putting up a good campaign and winning. I have consulted extensively. And now I have come to the party saying, look, I want to be the NUP flag bearer for this constituency, Kampala Central or Nakawa East or Nakawa West. Why should the party then have to have an unelected group of people in the party sit down to say, no, you actually can't stand, you should leave that position and go run for another position because so and so should run. Shouldn't that be left to the voters to decide?
Like I've told you, every party has its own internal dynamics and contestations. One of the biggest contestations in National Unity Platform, for example, is the Nakawa mayoral race, where Bobi Wine's best friend, Nobiandi, is running, and the former mayor, or the current mayor, the incumbent in the office, Paul, is still very strong on the ground. And that contestation...
But he's been forced out of the race.
Yes, so that's the thing. You can run as an independent. you can
anyways
cast your legs.
Let me come to you, Dismas.
But like
because
I said,
what I see in all this is signs that this seems to be a party of friends and family, and that if you're friends and family, the rules are a bit different, and if you're an outsider, the rules are certainly quite different.
It happens to many parties, but
this would be sad because the very existence of ANT is to fight these what they consider anti-democratic forces or practices by the NRM and other opposition leaders. So the youngest party, the most vibrant party, surely should be doing much better.
I think, like Raymond said, I think those are the dynamics of this party. I don't even think that they have the capacity because they're jostling for positions of who is going to stand for who. The other day I was even scratching my head and saying, okay, who is standing? Rubongwa is standing as a MP for Kampala Central.
This is the Secretary General of the party.
Secretary General of the party. Then Balimwezo is standing as a mayor. And so in my mind I was saying, how did they get to that decision? What is the process that they followed in order for them?
The NUP has clarified that there is an internal committee but
they have just set it up because people have already started doing their own campaigns and people have moved in terms of going to convince candidates. So even if they set up that committee, I think the
committee is to deal with the grievances arising out of this process, because even in the last election this was more or less the same method that was used.
Exactly. So the point is they needed to have been able to understand and know and learn from the past. You remember the euphoria of the last election when they were having so many individuals winning. So every other person thinks that allying, you can even see that they have copied what every other candidate uses of having your picture, Kwezi Tabaru, if you're standing for NUP,
next to
Bobi Wine, which is exactly what is happening in NRM. You are standing for Bufumbira South, you Samu Vitangaro, then you have Museveni on the side. So in order to attract this, so the point is, I think those are things that they would have thought about earlier than now, because now it's getting a little bit too late.
I want to come to you, Jimmy, because I think Obed here has no sympathies for anyone. But
you may be shocked.
But Jimmy, I'm certainly concerned. The NUP is a very young party. It's in its 5th year, right? Very young party, very vibrant, very youthful party, quite promising on Uganda's political scene, with a very charismatic leader in Honorable Robert Chagulanyi. Where do you think these fights will leave the party without an internal mechanism for dealing with grievances?
They have an internal mechanism. You said there's this committee that decides.
So what happens to those people who are not satisfied with the decisions of that organ? Because if I'm to bring up this statement for you, I'll get it out in a minute. But where does this leave the party?
I don't know what most parties, when they have grievances, they have like a system how it should be addressed, how it can be addressed. But also what you forget that within NUP, they think there's been some kind of infiltration. There are people who are going there but who are not actually NUP. They belong.
So how do we test for NUPness? Is there a blood test?
The committee they have their ways of,
because you can certainly say the same of some NRM MPs who come from strongholds in Uganda where you would not win if you're an opposition candidate.
Yeah, there's been talk that there's some kind of infiltration. So they have their ways
of vetting.
I don't know, there's a perception. So they have to find ways of...
So what better way to do this than subject it to the voice of the people? Because if you have your NUP supporters, they'll most likely vote. the best NUP candidate.
You know, party primaries are really expensive. I think it's the ruling party that has that kind of money that they can conduct the kind of primaries they're going to do. But the opposition parties don't have the kind of resources. So you have to work within your available means. What the kind of, if you are to do that, many people may be ruled out because they don't have the money. So you try to balance, you know.
Okay. Obed, you'll have the last word on this.
Well, I'll begin where Achlam has stopped. I think, well, he's saying party primaries involve money, which is true. But I don't think NUP is the biggest opposition party. So government has one of the shares they take, electoral commission, there is some amount of good money they commit to NUP, and in billions. So I think they realized they had
You never check that.
this money is given by electoral commission.
Yes, but this is by law. It's not a favor.
I'm not saying it's a favor, but I mean with that money they should have been able to ring-fence some amount to carry out the normal primaries to avoid what we are all fearing to happen. And remember, in some parts, especially in Buganda and Busoga, the enthusiasm is big. One position is contested for by so many people. This business of Chaguranyi thinking he's the other Chaguranyi of some 5 years back, in which case he will say, oh, Kwezi, don't. So step down for this, so may it not work. And it will be chaos. And remember, chaos for NUP. Remember, they have just, they're still getting out of one chaos of Mpuga and a section of them, of people who have his thinking.
So you think if these grievances are not resolved, we might see
that will be another second fracture, a second fracture in terms of even if it's another party forming of another party, but members of NUP falling off and probably not participating as NUPists in the general election.
We'll take a short commercial break, and when we come back, more of this discussion. You're listening to 933 KFM. This is the Friday Hot Seat. I'm joined by an eminent panel of journalists. I have Raymond Mujuni, I have Dismas Nkunda, Obed Katurebe, and Jimmy Achalam. The voice speaking to you is Kwezi Tabaro, standing in for Andrew Mwenda. Earlier on, I had told you about the new EPS speed limits that will be coming up, and the details are in tomorrow's Saturday Monitor, which is already on the streets. So here we have the proposed new speed limit. So if you're using Kajansi Expressway 1 and 2, that's 100 kilometers per hour. If you're using Chisubi Namlanda, that's 50 kilometers per hour. The Chigo Southern Bypass, 100 kilometers per hour. If you're using Yusufule, that's 30 kilometers per hour. That's Yusufule Road 1 and 2. And then if you're on the bypass in Bwaise, that's 70 kilometers per hour. While if you're driving on Katabi, that should be on the old Entebbe Road, speed limit is 40 kilometers per hour. Buy your copy of the Saturday Monitor for this and more stories. Gentlemen, still discussing the political season in Uganda. The NRM candidate, President Yoweri Museveni, is due for nomination tomorrow. Obed?
Yep, it's true.
Does it still make sense that President Yoweri Museveni is going to be nominated as the NRM candidate?
Why does it make sense? So you want...
No, it would be surprising if we're not sure if he would be selected as the party flag bearer.
But who else can be nominated?
No.
There are some people who have picked nomination forms.
Maguru, Major, retired, and some other two young men.
No, the reason I was asking you is because I've since lost count, and this is the 8th or 7th time that he's picking nominations. But what is so special about this particular run for President Yoweri Museveni? What's the issue?
But he hinted on it.
To fight corruption.
Fight corruption, but also still, like when he said, I want to superintend, look at my and the Bazukuru, meaning there is some unfinished business he needs to work on in the next 5 years. No, it's next 5 years. And then you evaluate and you see, do we bring him back or not? But in the wisdom of the members of the party, first there is no reason to change, and requested him, look, you still have some unfinished business. Please come back.
In line with that, President Yoweri Museveni is not growing any younger. In August this year, he will turn 81.
True.
Are these some of the issues that you think NRM members should be concerned about, and we should seriously be discussing, succession within the NRM itself, not just for President Yoweri Museveni, but many SEC members are really getting into the evening of their careers politically, and they're not getting any younger. So for a party like that aims to lead Uganda into the future, Uganda being a very young country, transition should be a major theme.
Well, but I think there is always time for everything. For sure, for all intents and purposes, to President Museveni, age is just a number. And you all agree, his contemporaries, most people of his age, some are breaking down, some have completely lost energy, but the mind is still strong. So how transitioning, that's a matter of, there is always time for that. Growing up, there was always this Margaret Thatcher in UK, but there came a time, she also stepped down, and everything continued. There's this other German Chancellor who also was
Angela Merkel.
Yeah.
No, she was there for only 17 years. President Yoweri Museveni is
to the European that was too much. But with President Museveni, I think there will be that time, probably when he'll signal that I'm signing out, and then the internal mechanism, the structures of the party will look at someone to come in.
When do you think that time will come?
I have no idea. But like I said, I'm a good Christian. They said there is always time for everything. And maybe that time has not come. And but what is comforting is that you're dealing with a man who is very, very strong. His mental faculties are still okay. You haven't seen him falling down on what, or being assisted to sit or stand.
Who are you referring to?
No. I'm saying certain characteristics that come with certain age. But he's still strong, he's still okay. So why not push on with him until when he'll signal that it's time up?
Jimmy Achalam, while the position of party flag bearer and national chairman is quite clear, there is no contestation, many other SEC positions are attracting quite a lot of interest. Key among those races is that between the Speaker of the House and the immediate former Speaker of the House, Honorable Kadaga. What do you make of the contest? So today, the Honorable Speaker was nominated as the Vice Chair for NRM Eastern Uganda, and had quite the following. Do you think Honorable Kadaga will bounce back?
That one is very difficult to tell, but certainly the Speaker has resources at her disposal. So some of this election comes to how much money you have. I don't know the former Speaker, how well resourced she is, but she might still have a big following. So it might be following versus money and all these things. So.
I've seen the Entrepreneurs League has quite the lineup, many other seats as well. Does this speak to what Obed was talking about much earlier, that
speak about
really that the NRM by far still remains the more popular party, and therefore if anyone wants to do something, they will most likely associate with the NRM.
The lineup of the entrepreneurs.
You have do you call him His Majesty King Caesar? No, he's Kwame is for General Secretary.
But you have Sanjay
Tana, there is Rukari, Mwesiga Rukari, who is MP for Mbara.
I know, and he's my friend. I do think that maybe it's a learning curve. I think NRM somehow, much as it has stayed for quite a long period of time, at least they have certain structures. Okay, there have been their own squabbles of fighting when they are getting who is a flag bearer and who is not. But at least they have the different catering for different groups of people in terms of who should represent who in whatever structures that they set up. So I wouldn't, the lineup of the people that we have mentioned, I mean, many of them are seasoned people. Robert is a seasoned person, Rukari. Tana is. About my good friend King C, I don't know. That one we...
You don't know about his chances, or you don't know about his suitability for that position?
Let's not discuss that.
I tell you, this man cannot speak about this matter.
Raymond.
No, I think, one, what we haven't realized is that it's not just the chairman's position that's ring-fenced. The immediate vice is also a ring-fenced position. And I think all the other positions are out for contest. The NRM is shedding its skin. I think Rebecca Dag is going to be defeated roundly, without a doubt. So you have the newer age, younger NRM MPs who will take position in SEC, but the most important and powerful position in the NRM, which is the chairmanship of the NRM, still remains open and uncontested. Now,
remains open and uncontested, or is close to one person?
I'm saying in terms of change.
Okay.
It remains open and uncontested. This is I don't want to speak as a prophet of doom, but I think this is the president's last election. And you get the feeling from many people who are close to him that they're going to position this election as his last election. So it's going to look very much like a legacy election. I think some of the statements he will make tomorrow after nomination might speak to some of these things. But that also means that this is a period for the NRM to undergo turbulence for the next 5 years, where people openly jostle for power within the party. Who has what power? It's been very interesting.
So that's settled.
Yeah, I don't know if it's settled. I've seen some really young members of parliament, contestants who are sons of veteran NRM members of parliament, and you can clearly see that there's a hand of their parents behind them, and that hand knows something that we probably aren't considering. But I think there will be open game, open contest on many of these positions. Does NRM remain the most popular party? Definitely. Does it have the best politics? I'm not sure. But it remains, yes, it remains the most, it remains without doubt the most popular party. And you will see it in the next week when they go to their primaries. Nearly the entire country will come to standstill because of the NRM primaries that are going to happen.
I see. We'll take a short commercial break, and when we come back, the last segment of this show.
KFM.
Welcome back to this edition of the Hot Seat, the Friday panel of journalists. Standing in for Andrew Mwenda is me, Kwezi Tawaru. I have a panel of former journalists and panelists to discuss the major stories of the week. I have Jimmy Achalam, Obed Katureve, Dismas Nkunda, and Raymond Mujuni. We've been discussing the political campaign season in Uganda, but now we stretch our leg and step into the region with the peace agreement that was signed between Rwanda and the DRC last week, Friday, in the White House in Washington, D.C. Rwanda, represented by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Honorable Olivier Nduhungirehe, while the DRC was represented by Miss Kaikwamba Wagner, not Wagner. She's German Congolese. Dismas, you're quite familiar with matters in the region. President Paul Kagame had an interaction with the media today. It's quite uncharacteristic for Rwanda not to have a parade on July the 4th, which is Liberation Day. But the first question that was asked to him was his stance on this peace agreement between the DRC and Rwanda, and he said for as long as Rwanda will hold its side of the bargain, for as long as DRC continues to violate the terms of the agreement, Rwanda will, quote unquote, continue doing what it was doing in the past.
So, for me that thing is very complex. First of all, an agreement of such an intensity and such a implication between those two countries, DRC and Rwanda, and it's signed by ministers of foreign affairs. Wasn't it easy that President Kagame and President Tshisekedi would have been the ones to go and sign face to face like they did when they met in Qatar? That's one. Two is that the contestation, as far as I'm concerned, is between M23 and the Congolese army. So how does then Rwanda represent M23 when there has been denials?
So the agreement, to clarify, the agreement is between the two parties, the governments of Rwanda and the government of the DRC. But the M23 is party to other agreements that are being worked on, the Qatar process,
yes,
as well as the Nairobi-Luanda process.
Yes.
So in Nairobi, Rwanda process, the parties there are M23 and the DRC government.
But what is the admission there? Is Rwanda admitting?
The admission there is that if you read the agreement, that Rwanda accuses the DRC of working with FDLR, while the DRC in turn accuses Rwanda of supporting them M23 and also deploying on Congolese soil. Rwanda says these are active defensive measures because you're supporting FDLR. So the agreement signed in Washington, D.C. says, cease support to all negative groups. So in the case of Rwanda, if you've been supporting M23, stop supporting M23. Lift your defensive measures. Same for the DRC, stop supporting FDLR. And then go back to the Qatar process as well as the Rwanda process now, which is where the issues of M23 are being discussed.
True, but the point is, given the nature of the politics of this region, and in particular between DRC and you know, there was even a violation as like maybe 2-3 days after. So to say or think...
Well, M23 alleges that a plane carrying food aid was shot down by the Congolese forces.
Yes. So to imagine and think that this is going to stand, given the nature in which each one of them, particularly the DRC having little capacity to be able to deal with a tiny country like Rwanda, it's going to be a complex matter that is not going to be solved by a simple agreement signed before President Trump.
Raymond, you are the diplomat in training. What do you make of this agreement? Because when you read through the lines, you clearly see that the Trump administration is very clear in what they want out of this agreement. They want a good business environment in Eastern DRC for U.S. companies to continue having transacting business. And if for that to happen, you need to have peace between Rwanda and DRC, so be it. Question is, what does Rwanda and DRC want out of this process?
So I'd be very constrained because some matters, of course, fall under oath. But one, I think, first of all, the nature.
What do you mean
of
they fall under oath?
There are matters regarding the Foreign Affairs Ministry of Uganda. I wouldn't want to get into them. One, the understanding from many quarters who are party to this process is that, first of all, the US came in as a point of influence and relevance.
But was invited by one party, the DRC?
Not entirely, really. Not entirely. There had already been a US lobby within its own Congress, not attached to the DRC lobby, that had been asking that they get involved because the race for critical minerals is on, and China already has more than 95% of all their critical minerals. They can manufacture them within China. The US would need to import more than 60% of what it needs to make critical minerals. And one of the havens for that is the DRC. So some lobby groups within the Congress had been saying, this is a very important point for us to get access to critical minerals. And
in this case, the DRC?
Yes, and the understanding was, one, appoint an Africa representative, let that representative come and study the region. The representative came.
So Trump elected his in-law?
Yes, he met many heads of state. Many heads of state expressed their intention, said these are the issues. Those issues were taken, and then the process started. It's more an appeasement of Trump than it is a resolution of the problems happening inside the DRC. So,
why do you
for
think
example, I don't think in any case that the M23 is going to leave Goma or Beni anytime soon. I don't think that the M23 is going to stop issuing permits in
the M23 is in Bukavu and Goma.
Yes, but even parts of Beni and now sliding into Kisangani. I don't think they're going to stop issuing permits in places like Walikale, where they're already issuing them. I don't think...
These are mining permits?
Yes. I don't think, for example, that anyone is going to stop the RN27, the road out of Ituri coming into Uganda. I don't think those components are within the scope of the people who are negotiating that deal. It was important for Rwanda to be part of that process because Rwanda had lost favor with the US. It was important for the US to be seen at a global stage to also have some scale and matter of influence.
Also, Trump wants his Nobel Prize.
Yes, but the more important negotiations are still in the Rwanda process and I think the Qatar process. And those two processes have slowed down to a hilt. Now, for Uganda, we have our own concerns. The nature of the deal itself, I'm sure Uganda will reject majority of the parts of that deal when it finally
we don't have time to go into that, but Obed, what is Uganda's position on this agreement between Rwanda and the DRC? Because we find ourselves in a very interesting position. We're not Rwanda's enemies, we're not DRC's enemies, but our relationship with either of the countries puts us,
well, we've been accused of
in a difficult position with either of them.
Well, but you know that one people who have been pushing for dialogue has been President Museveni. Largely even trying to rain on.
So isn't this an indictment on him that all their efforts have not materialized? It took
not him to
President Trump to get the parties to sign something.
He's not been lobbying to be the one to chair the whatever dialogue, but just for the sake of peace in Congo, together with the neighbors, he's been pushing for dialogue, for them to go back on the table. And Tshisekedi was a little bit not buying into it, annoyed extremely. So the fact that now they are openly into discussions, which, as a matter of fact, will lead to at least guns going silent.
But they haven't. Dismas was telling you only 2 days after the signing of the agreement.
But of course, going forward, a lot of communication. We decided in Washington, but now those people had to come, each party, brief their leaders and even down to the command structure of those involved in the theater of war. So, guns were seized. Because remember, this is USA. This is Trump. Even in previous conflicts that were in Congo were silenced by the big people abroad, not regional engagements. So the fact that Trump is into it, Congo, like Raymond put it across, now there is a mineral deal into a mineral factor, but also Rwanda cannot afford to lose USA as an ally. They are critical ally. They can lose anybody in Europe, but not USA. So I'm optimistic that this will end.
I'd like to come to you, Jimmy. Do you think that finally peace is on the horizon? Because I don't agree with Obed that just signing this piece of paper in Washington all of a sudden means the guns fall silent.
Exactly. Just that signing, because of it's Trump and the US, there'll be maybe some sort of fear that we have to, but it's not a done deal that there's going to be.
Because the argument does not go to the heart of the issues. I listened to President Kagame this afternoon saying that, in fact, he said there were 3 issues that he thinks are the cause of the conflict there: political, the economic, and their security. And he says the agreement does not address the political side of the issue, and he even doubts the legitimacy of President Tshisekedi's presidency. He says his presidency was the result of a deal between him and Kabila, and he says there are some African presidents who actually witnessed that handover. So he says until that legitimacy issue is resolved internally within the DRC, there will always be contestations internally that will be exported.
Even some key actors, like the spokesperson of the M23 was, we don't recognize.
The former president, President Kabila, called it a trade deal between the DRC and...
It's largely that, really. It's not their interest.
It's not a peace deal.
It's more about their economic interest than really peace in the region.
Even unenforceable, and this is the bigger problem, that the United States cannot enforce the economic outcomes of that deal. The mineral areas are held by the M23. M23 has now started to govern those areas. It started to issue travel permits in those areas. I don't think that can be undone. And in any case, the US's strongest ally in dealing with the DRC still remains Uganda. So until Uganda is part of the deal, it remains the paper it is.
All right, gentlemen, it's been a wonderful show. Thank you, our dear listeners. We'll be right back next week with an even bigger panel to discuss the major stories of the week. Good night.